Nicole writes, I have a small organization that has mostly been supported by small donations, but we will be receiving our first grant next year, as well as a major large gift, which will be our first restricted funds. What do we need to do with our accounting systems to receive these funds and comply with the restrictions? So, Mike, this is another one for you, but just setting the table. People know, I think this is well understood. When you receive funds subject to a donor restriction, whether that comes from a grantor or an individual donor who gave, with noting that it's only for this purpose, or in response to a solicitation that said, you're donating for this, there's strong legal requirement that you have to keep track of that restriction, comply with it, not spend funds in a way that's inconsistent. And that's enforced by the state attorney general, and it's a serious area. But that's just the requirement. It's not self-implementing there. You actually have to be able to show that the money's being properly spent, and how do you do that? And that's a challenge, I think, for organizations that had not done that before and now have to grapple with, well, how do we actually trace this money and show that we complied with the restriction? So what does that entail, Mike?
Yeah. One thing up front, some organizations shy away from restricted funds because they're worried about this. Mm-hmm. And I like a lot of things, applying for your first grant. It always seems more onerous than it is, and that you're going to be okay. And a gazillion of organizations get grants and they live to, another day. So it's usually expansion of programs, attracting more funds outweighs the compliance issues and things. So just to state the obvious up front.
Yeah.
Number two, not to do a lecture on restricted funds, but remember there's two key types of restrictions. There is a purpose restriction for a specific purpose, and there can also be a time restriction.
Right.
And they can also be there at the same time, which is a grant. Mm-hmm. A grant is usually for a specific purpose, and I've never seen an open-ended grant in my entire life. Right. It goes forever.
Right.
So there'll be an inherent time restriction of some kind. Mm-hmm. And so we're usually dealing with that. And that's where the changes come to the accounting system. And it's not so much on actually the revenue side, the money coming in, although we want to put it into, set up accounts that show the funds are restricted. Mm-hmm. And to be able to have, contribution lines and such that, you can have an unrestricted contribution, you have a restricted contribution, to be able to segregate those.
Yeah.
But the key in the system where the little bit of work is separating, when you've met the restriction and the expenses are allowable under that.
Right.
And that's where the important schedule called net asset releases is prepared as part of the audit process, although we should be keeping it going all year long.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 2 steps to get back to the net asset release schedule. Step number 1 is every dollar that comes in the door, my favorite thing to say, is unrestricted until you prove there's a restriction.
Okay.
Don't assume it, because only the donor or the source can restrict the funds in the documentation. Mm-hmm. So, go there, don't think, I think there's. But you want a good donor management, talk to the donor, make sure everybody's crystal clear, but don't assume it automatically goes to restriction. So that affects documentation on the front end. Every dollar spent is coming out of unrestricted money, and then we do this thing called release from restrictions, and that's how through the audit process or through the accounting system we show that a dollar spent in unrestricted meets the allowability under a restricted purpose, so we release it. So it just so people see the process of that. So setting up, if I had just had 30 seconds with you, I said sit down with your auditors, your accountants, and set up a system to do net asset releases to show the transfer of money you spent unrestricted that would be allowable under that grant. Mm-hmm. You have a library, you bought books, you've been buying books all year long, the books are, met the restriction of the donor. So all the expenses related to buying books, we could shift over. On an audited financial statement, you'll see the net asset releases where that line zeroes out under income. Mm-hmm. But it's moving through the income, that line. It's moving because all the expenses are down below. They don't show restricted. So we're moving it from unrestricted without donor restrictions to restricted with donor restrictions.
Right. And forgive the very basic, uninformed question, but this happens as the entries are getting recorded. There's a way of flagging it so that it will kind of populate a schedule of release.
It's a two-step dance.
Yeah.
We spend the money, we buy the books for the library. We're buying them all year long. Then, as separate step, as we go back and say, did these book purchases meet allowability rules for the donor, the grant, whatever the restricted source was? And then we do this extra journal entry.
Gotcha.
I always like to say it's part of the Accountant's Full Employment Act.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You wish you could just go right there, and sometimes we do, but this net asset release, the benefit of the net asset release is you could see this physical transfer of things we spent money on, that we went through this second step, so to speak, of was it allowable, consideration, and then we move it over. Mm-hmm. So my answer to the question is great. Don't let it hold you back. Sit down. Most nonprofits have this, to set up for the tracking restricted funds. And the way you can do that, a side step, is to set up departments and sub-departments, categories, cost centers. And you could have library book purchases, restricted, library books unrestricted, or for a grant. There's lots of different ways to work with the system.
Yeah. And Mike, may I ask, since you just triggered the worst case scenario part of my brain, in that process, what if you find that it was not allowable?
Yeah, you can make an adjusting journal, because sometimes it's just like, a misclassification. I hate to call it an error in the system and all these kind of things. But there's also, to show you how we actually use that, Ben, is I don't like to underspend on restricted funds. So we pack in everything we can, and oftentimes we'll overspend the funds, which is good. Then we, by default, have used unrestricted funds to cover on the program.
Okay, yeah.
And the built-in side of that is a lot of municipal grants will, the state or local entity will limit the amount of funds that are allowable for overhead.
Yeah.
And a lot of states, especially one we live in here, limits it to 10% when there isn't an overhead that's under 10%.
Right.
And so we charge the full overhead, and then we'll back out.
Right.
Piece, just because I want to see where we're making money or losing money, and or do we fundraise other places?
Yeah.
To cover.
Yeah.
Under audit, you can have a true unallowable cost. It pops up once in a while. Like the Fly America plan. All of a sudden, we didn't realize we bought these tickets because they were so much cheaper on a foreign carrier. And it's just not allowable. I mean, we didn't do it.
Right.
And we just say, hey, it was worth the savings of dollars, or next time we better buy a domestic ticket.
Right.